Hey, I'm Dean and this is Legacy Voyage. In Season 1, I'm documenting my journey to earning my first 100K net worth as a full-time college student. Join me as I share some of the lessons I learned along the way. Get this thing rolling. Okay, last episode I talked about the Paris trip and a story I had when I was out there. Today I'm going to do the very same thing. Here's another thing that happened on the Paris trip. Let's see, setting the stage. I got into Paris on Friday, took a little nap, and then we slept, woke up Saturday the next morning. But that day, I believe we only got I want to say 7-ish hours, 7 hours max, probably more like 6 hours of sleep. And keep in mind, I was completely jet lagged. So the entire day I was just dragging my feet and everything. So we're going about our day. We pull up to the Louvre in Paris, the art museum over there. And another side note, I couldn't go to the Louvre because I didn't buy tickets far enough in advance. By the time I realized I was trying to go to Paris, tickets were already sold out because I decided a couple days before. And that's just standby life, it's how things are. But regardless, I couldn't go to the Louvre, so I spent that entire day just exploring. And I was dead tired, so in between bus rides, I literally drifting off into the abyss. But after my friends, they finished up at the Louvre, we all met up after, grabbing lunch. And then they did the next thing, which is the Catacombs. This is the place that's full of skulls in Paris. And surprise, surprise, I couldn't go again because tickets were sold out by the time I was trying to book it. So instead of going with them and exploring, I decided, you know what? It's time to knock out. I'm dead tired. I'm gonna head to bed. So I head to a friend's apartment where we were staying at. I go and knock out over there for a solid nap. And then we meet up again with everyone after to grab dinner. They're talking, grabbing dinner. Something comes up. And I think it was a conversation of who are your ops at school? Because these are all Northwestern kids. Who are your ops? So everyone's talking about their ops, and then they start complaining about them. Oh yeah, I had this one person who made things so difficult for me, and they were doing this and doing that, and they even did this really, really bad thing to me. And they're talking about their ops. I was like, okay. But through that entire conversation, I took a step back and kind of maybe psychoanalyzed myself or something, but I was so zoned out of the conversation. But I zoned out of the conversation so much because I'm not a complainer and I don't like complaining. And in fact, I'll take it even a step further. I think complaining is useless. But more specifically, I think complaining without action is completely useless. So as this person was kind of venting, kind of complaining in a way, the other people at the table, they're like, oh, that sucks, man. Why would they ever do that? That's so dumb. But in my head, I was just thinking about how complaining is so useless. And I completely understand. It seems actually it doesn't seem, it is very anti-empathetic. Maybe that's not the right word, but one thing about me is that I'm not a very empathetic person. I remember I was applying for this internship. As part of the interview process, one of the things we had to do, a personality test. Myers-Briggs, I think it's called. It's the famous one. But I went through the personality test and I found out that my personality type is the same as Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. And initially I heard that, I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. Both super successful dudes, successful in terms of business success and financially. But that was interesting, so I kept reading up on what the personality type means. And honestly, it really did seem to fit well with what I knew about myself. But there was one thing specifically that stood out to me. I was like, oh, I'm not sure about this part. And it was the fact that I'm not very empathetic. In fact, I score pretty low on the empathy scale. And I think that story that I just told when I was in Paris perfectly encapsulates or demonstrates that part of me, is that I'm not very empathetic. I think in some cases, it definitely is helpful to not be empathetic. If someone is trying to use you and manipulate you and you're just over it, just not being empathetic, no. That might be a scenario where being empathetic is bad. But there's other scenarios where having empathy is absolutely a good thing. When you're trying to connect with other people and understand them more. Absolutely, empathy is important. So that's one thing about myself that I definitely want to work on. More specifically, because that's one of my dream identity, of my ideal self, is someone who is empathetic. But moving on from the story for today's podcast, I want to talk about the next section, which is the philosophizing section. These are random things I've been thinking about and philosophizing about. And the first thing is, I'm calling it fulfilling ambition. I mapped this framework, this idea, onto my vice virtue scale, my mental model. Here's the quick run through about it. Maybe I'll illustrate a story to show this idea better. Growing up, especially being Pacific Islander, being Tongan, things are really chill. Like, island life is so laid back and so chill that no one really worries about the future. Everyone just lives in the present, which in some cases absolutely is a good thing. I remember specifically when I went back to the islands. So I grew up there when I was super little, and then I finally returned back there after my first semester in high school. And keep in mind, coming back from this semester in high school was the first time I was super stressed out about things. The first time I ever had to study in my life, because middle school was super light. So high school was like, oh dang, this is legit. This is what finals is like. So like going through that dreading period where I was in some ways very ambitious. I really wanted to get those A's on my report card. And I was working super, super hard. And then to come back to the islands and be reminded of what it means to just be chill and go with the flow. Literally that entire trip, there were so many days where I was with my cousin born and raised on the islands. There were so many days where I was like, okay, what are we doing next? Where are we going? What are we doing after that? What are we gonna eat? Like, I was worrying about all these things and asking him all these questions. And he was like, bro, go with the flow. I think he said it in his Tongan accent, go with the flow. And so I was reminded, of course, being ambitious and working hard, these are good attributes to have. These are virtues, I think, that I want in my ideal self. But also being able to chill. And being able to go back to the islands and go with the flow. Like hopping on random trucks, not knowing where the truck is headed, but just being like, okay, we'll see where it goes and figure things out from there. But being able to chill, like sit down and relax. And it's balancing this islander life, the chill culture of I have enough, and the American way of life that I've experienced of I want more. I want my A's. I want more money. I want to help more people, things like that. So I think the challenge comes when we are trying to balance these two ways of thinking. Because when we tip too far one way over another, then that's where we get to the vices, which is why I call it the virtue vice scale, because a virtue pushed to the extreme becomes a vice. For example, when we say, oh, we're just chilling, I have enough, then that's the point where we get to like just being lazy and not doing anything, to the point where we say, I don't want more. And you're not challenging yourself. Whereas on the other side, if we're too ambitious and we're too hardworking, then it can develop into greed. We're always thinking, I don't have enough, and I will never have enough, in fact. But trying to balance these two seemingly paradoxical ideas, I think is very powerful. And my term for it is called fulfilling ambition. And it's recognizing the fact that fulfillment is in the pursuit, not achievement. So for example, right now, I'm trying to lose weight. Let's say I'm trying to get six-pack abs. But it's important to recognize that it's not getting those six-pack abs that I will get fulfilled and be fulfilled. It's the pursuit of getting there. The pursuit of practicing discipline and delayed gratification and working hard in the gym. Those things are what brings fulfillment. It's not getting the six-pack abs. And even the intro to this podcast, it's not getting the 100K, that's the whole goal, and that once you get 100K, then you'll be fulfilled. It's knowing that in the pursuit of getting the 100K, that is what brings fulfillment. Because in order to get there, it requires certain character traits. It requires a certain amount of hard work and discipline. And I believe serving others to generate value. So in one sense, I have enough, meaning being content with what I already have, but also thinking I want more. I want to challenge myself. I want to push myself even harder. Now, of course, there are probably things that I haven't thought completely through about this framework, but I think it holds up. And applying this virtue vice scale to a lot of different things in my head has really clarified a lot, and I think it's super helpful. On to the next thing I've been thinking about is what's called a conditional. So right now I'm taking a logic class, and it's very similar, I think, to computer science, because in both there are these things called conditionals. And a conditional is just an if-then statement. If I go for a walk, then I will be happier. Something as simple as that is an if-then statement, or called a conditional. And I've been thinking about this specific conditional for a while. It's the conditional in the Bible. It says, if you put God first, then everything else falls into place. Now, that's not a direct quote from the Bible, but it's taken out of Matthew 6, verse 33, which says, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. And this introduces the idea of this condition, where if someone puts God first, then everything else will fall into place. As I've been thinking more and more about this, the first thing I thought of is, what the heck does it mean to fall into place? Because my version of everything falling into place could be very, very different than your version, which is probably different than God's version. And which one do we want? Do we want my version of falling into place or his, or what are we after here? Now, honestly, I don't have an answer for you on that one. What falling into place means, this would be my preliminary answer. It would probably be something along the lines of reaching your full potential of what God had for you. Or for me personally, it'd be reaching my ideal self, my dream identity, or at least coming closer to Jesus Christ. And I wanted to, share those things and clarify it, because there's two takeaways from this. The first takeaway is that just because someone looks like everything falls into place doesn't necessarily mean that they have put God first in their life. And that's just the way conditionals work. Let's say I go and I tell my little sister, I say, hey, if you get an A on your test, then we'll go grab ice cream. It's a very simple if-then conditional statement. And then later you find out, oh, we went and we grabbed ice cream. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that she got an A on her test. Maybe she got an F on her test and she was crying, and I was like, okay, you know what? Because you're crying so much, let's just go grab ice cream. But even in that scenario, I didn't lie to her. I just said, if you get an A, then we'll go grab ice cream. I never said anything about if you get an F. And so applying that same framework to this, just because someone looks like everything falls into place, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have put God first. That's the first takeaway from this. The second takeaway is that if everything doesn't fall into place, then you're definitely not putting God first. With the ice cream example, let's say I tell my sister, if you get an A on your test, then we'll go grab ice cream. And then you find out later that day, we never went to grab ice cream. Well, if I wasn't lying, then you had to assume that obviously she didn't get an A. And this works in the very same way, where if nothing falls into place, then it would follow that that person is not putting God first. And like I said, I think this has definitely applied to my life. And I'll talk more about this when I get to probably L's of the week or my life update, one of the two. But I've definitely seen this play out in my life. Well, the third and final thing for this philosophizing section is about an internal focus. Man, I'm realizing how these are some pretty touchy subjects I'm bringing up. Anyway, this past week we did a DEI talk, like sit down chat thing, fireside, whatever you want to call it. But we got together in the scholarship house and we all talked about what DEI is, what diversity, equity, and inclusion is, put some definitions on and put some terms to it. And then we got thinking about this idea of microaggressions and belonging, and what does it mean that something is a microaggression, or what does it mean to belong in a community? And one thing that was brought up was an idea from a book that I forgot the name of. There's a study where they looked at kids from disadvantaged backgrounds. Basically, they grew up poor and now they're surrounded by all these rich folks. They're trying to figure out, why does one student claim that they belong versus another student? And they found that it was more of an internal thing, where the differentiator wasn't the way other people treated them, although that could definitely play a role, but it was more so in themselves. And for me, I think this really highlighted the fact that all of this stuff was very internally focused, but more so that it's like a very pragmatic mindset, and how helpful the pragmatic mindset is, because I'm a huge advocate of it, which is why I'm probably not big on complaining, just because pragmatically, like, what does that bring? What value does that have? Man, that's a lot of rambling and yapping, more than usual, I feel. But moving on to L's of the week, where I go over some L's that I took this past week. The biggest L I've definitely taken is just, I crashed hard. I'm talking about binge eating, like off the max, binging anime, binging shows. I mean, it was really, really unhealthy. Like, I can say that in retrospect, looking back at it, but I think something like that, for me, really humanizes other people. Because now I've gone through what it's like to fight through an addiction. Because truthfully, that's what it is. Like, it's an addiction to food. And honestly, it's just this emotional coping mechanism to run away from emotions. And I've talked about this several times, and I will probably keep talking about it, but being able to go through that and break out of it multiple times. I've broken out of that cycle many times, but I've also fallen back into the cycle many times. And so, yeah, this past week was like, literally stayed up till 5 in the morning, many nights in a row, and got like 4 or 5 hours of sleep some nights, and had to push through. And there was literally a day where I woke up, I think at 1 or 2 p.m. and stayed in my room, literally sat there the entire time, like the entire day. Didn't go work out, didn't even walk out the house. But I'm not saying all this to complain, because like I mentioned, I'm not one to complain. I'm not a big fan of that. But I'm saying all this to share the journey, because it's not all sunshine and rainbows. It's not all like Andrew Tate or David Goggins are out here, oh, you just gotta work harder and gotta be tougher, stop being a baby. It's like, it's legit. I'm going through it because trying to do all these things, build a business and work hard and be fit and get good grades, like all these things, it's not easy. Because if it was easy, then it wouldn't be worth achieving. It wouldn't be worth pursuing. At least that's what I think in my head. But thankfully, and gratefully, I was able to break out of this most recent cycle, particularly because of what I talked about earlier with this conditional. If you put God first, everything else falls in place. And I really took that to heart because over the weekend, why that was happening was specifically because I was not fulfilling the conditional, and the conditional being to put God first. Then everything else will fall into place. And so I think Hormozi actually talks about this, like focusing on the big domino, the thing that moves the needle the most. Where if you focus on this one thing, everything else just falls into place. Realizing it now, the big domino to life, to literally everything, boom, is God. And I totally understand for people who are listening who are like atheists or irreligious or against religion, probably like maybe some of this is not resonating with you, but even if it's not, I think there probably is a big domino in your life anyways. And just focusing more on that, I found to be super, super helpful. But moving on to the next section of the pod, which is my weekly roundup. These are interesting little tidbits, little things that I found over the past week. The first thing I found was this clip of Kobe. And this was the 2009 finals. After game 2, he just won. The Lakers are up 2-0, and he's doing his press conference review. He is literally stone-faced in this review because you'd expect this guy who just won 2 games in the finals, up 2-0, you'd expect him to be super happy, super ecstatic. I mean, that's at least how I am. Even if I win a regular old rugby game, even if it's not like the championship, the finals, bro, I'm ecstatic. I'm super happy, super pumped. And a reporter straight up asked him, was like, hey, why are you, what's up with you, bro? Like, why are you not happy? Why does it look like you're not happy? And then Kobe legit responds, is the job finished? I thought this was like the most cold-blooded, winner mentality, champion mindset response anyone could have. Is the job finished? Because in the NBA finals, the job isn't finished unless you've won 4 games. And he only won 2 games. He's like, job finished? I don't think so. Job's not finished. I think that was literally the quote he said, job's not finished. And I think that question really resonated with me. Is the job finished? Like, sure, I made a sale, but is the job finished? Sure, I got a workout in today, but is the job finished? And I think this definitely leaned more towards, and Kobe for sure, he probably leaned more towards what I was mentioning earlier, more towards the ambitious side. And I think this is probably something that I find very admirable, I think. Someone who can look at the scoreboard, look at a win, but ask himself, is the job finished? And knowing full well it's not finished. So he's gonna keep going. So he's gonna keep trying. So he's gonna keep putting that work, putting that effort in. I think it's super admirable. But also not getting that confused with pushing that to the extreme and then it becomes greed and you don't know how to chill. I think that's also very important, but finding the balance, of course, is key. And the nuance, of course, is key. Now, that was the question I found over the past week. The next thing I found was a clip from Hormozi. And it was a pretty fascinating clip because it connected perfectly with what I was talking about last episode with the myth of Sisyphus and how if we imagine Sisyphus happy, it's not the result that he's after, but more so the effort he's putting in and what that effort is doing to him as a person and his character. As a quick refresher, myth of Sisyphus is this dude who's punished to roll a rock up a hill, and when he gets to the top of the hill, the rock rolls down and he goes back down and does it again. And he's gonna do that for all of eternity. And Alex, he addresses this thing and brings up an analogy that I thought was pretty applicable, especially to the myth of Sisyphus. Although he didn't mention it specifically, it definitely applied. And he talked about how when he's working out, he's picking up the weights and putting the weights back, right back to where they were. So realistically, he's not changing anything. In the same way Sisyphus started to roll this rock up the hill, but he just rolled all the way back down, he's not changing anything. But the value comes from the change within the person. Because when I go lift and when I go work out, it strengthens my muscles and it strengthens me as a person. In the same way, when Sisyphus rolls that rock up the hill, sure, it might roll back down and it might not change anything, but him as a person, he is the asset. He is the one who is being built. And so I think the big takeaway that Alex had was the business works more on you than you work on the business. Something along those lines, but it was along those lines of the asset that you're building is yourself, which I thought was very powerful and something that I definitely agree with. Now moving on to the life update, starting with, of course, my God. I mentioned this in L's of the Week, but I definitely lost my focus. I lost my eye on the ball, or however people say that reference. And I think because I did that, or not necessarily because I did that, but doing that made me lose focus on what really matters, I think. And when I lose focus on what really matters, I just spiral into this downhill thing. And over the past couple days, trying to get back on track with things, and it's definitely been helpful. I will say that it's definitely been helpful, and I've been getting more on track with dieting and working out and all the things and putting that work in, basically being on the grind. Either way, things are on the up and up. At least that's how they are currently. We'll keep updated on how things change, but moving on to update on myself. Like I mentioned last week, sleep was not very good. So now that I've put God first and locking more in on my sleep routine and being more on top of things there, I think it's definitely been a ton of help. So sleep is improving, diet is improving, working out, of course. Moving on to my people. It's been good, I think. I have noticed over this past week, I've definitely been more to myself. Like whenever I pull up to the garage, there's always a couple people in the residency side. They're all working. And I want to challenge myself over the next week to go up and meet them and talk to them. Because I just been keeping to myself and I haven't been meeting new people, especially at the garage. Like those are the people that I want to be talking with. Those are the people I want to be hanging out with. So, and I just realized that today. Because today I struck a conversation up with another dude. Well, actually, I didn't strike it up with him. The other dude struck up a conversation with me. And so we got talking and then found out he was a really cool dude. But either way, that's definitely something that I want to be more aware of, definitely work on. I'm just meeting more people. People are cool. People are cool indeed. And they open up so many opportunities for luck and random things like that. Moving on to update on my work. Let's see. Honestly, not too much to update on the work side. I'm still grinding away with Roundabout, the AI traffic light startup. Kind of taking a back seat with We Are Nesian, and honestly, diving into different ideas that I've been having. There's one idea in particular that I low-key want to just spend a weekend on and build. Maybe I'll do this when I'm in Tonga, but I really want to work on an AI mental health app because I think the industry market opportunity is there. The trend of our younger generations being more open to using something like AI for mental health is there. The problem of mental health is definitely there. And so I think, like, very simplistically, the problem exists and there's a new compelling solution to the problem that I think I might want to dip my toes in, but that's just a random side thought. In terms of other stuff, yeah, school's going okay. I got to finish strong for finals, but next week I'm basically done with finals and I'm off to see the world. We'll see where I end up next week, but either way, I shall see you soon. I record these episodes completely free to share success with everyone. So the only thing I ask is that if you learned anything or found something interesting in this episode, just leave a review and share it with a friend. Only takes 5 seconds and it would mean the world. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next episode. Tatok, see you.